Maya walked onto the plane with a small carry bag and a quiet, calm face. She wore a plain gray jacket and simple shoes that looked ready for a long day. Her hair was neatly tied back and her eyes stayed focused on the seat numbers. She did not rush, and she did not look for attention from anyone. To most travelers she looked like an ordinary passenger heading home. But inside her mind she was alert in a way most people never notice. She had trained herself to stay steady no matter what the world threw at her. She reached her seat by the window and sat down without making noise. She placed her bag under the seat in front and buckled in with slow, careful hands. Outside the window the airport lights glowed and workers moved like tiny figures. Maya breathed in and out like she was counting time in her head. She liked the quiet moment before takeoff when the cabin felt like a waiting room. It was the only time people were still and the air had not turned tense yet. She turned her face toward the window and let her thoughts stay private. Across the aisle a man named Brad watched her the moment she sat down. He wore a bright suit and a heavy watch that caught the light when he moved. His voice was already louder than the people around him as he talked on his phone. When he ended the call, he leaned toward the woman beside him and muttered something. The woman gave a quick look toward Maya, then looked away like she felt awkward. Brad kept staring like he wanted Maya to notice his displeasure. Maya did not react because she had learned that silence can be armor. A few minutes later Brad reached up and pressed the call button above his head. A flight worker came with a polite smile and asked what he needed. Brad pointed across the aisle and said he did not want to sit near that passenger. His tone was sharp and his words were meant to travel farther than his seat. The flight worker blinked and asked him to explain what the problem was. Brad said he felt unsafe and wanted the passenger moved right away. Nearby heads turned and the quiet cabin began to fill with whispers. Maya slowly turned her face and looked directly at Brad. Her expression stayed calm but her eyes carried a steady warning. She asked him in a clear voice what exactly made him feel unsafe. Brad shifted in his seat and looked annoyed that she spoke up. He said he paid good money and did not want trouble during the flight. He added that he had a bad feeling and wanted a different arrangement. Maya did not flinch and she did not lower her eyes. The flight worker tried to keep control and spoke gently to both of them. She said everyone must remain seated and follow assigned seating. Brad pushed back and repeated that he would not fly until Maya was removed. His words made the air feel thick like the cabin had lost its oxygen. A man 2 rows behind frowned, as if he disliked the scene. A young woman near the aisle hugged her bag closer to her chest. Maya noticed the fear and confusion spreading like smoke and she hated it. Maya took a slow breath and turned her shoulders slightly toward the aisle. She kept her voice soft but steady so it would not sound like a fight. She said she had done nothing wrong and she was not moving. Brad laughed once and said people like her always make a scene. The flight worker stiffened at his words and looked embarrassed. Maya watched Brad carefully because she could tell he wanted power not peace. She decided it was time to end the guessing and end the whispers. She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket with a slow, deliberate motion. It was not dramatic but it was precise like a practiced routine. A few passengers leaned forward and some held their breath. Brad smirked as if he expected a complaint or a phone video. Maya pulled out a small leather holder and opened it in one smooth move. Inside was an official badge and an identification card from a federal agency. She held it at chest level so the flight worker could see it clearly. The flight worker froze for a moment, then her eyes widened with recognition. Her posture changed like someone had flipped a switch in her spine. She lowered her voice and asked Maya if she was on duty. Maya nodded once and said she was traveling for work and had been keeping it quiet. Brad stopped smiling as his face tightened and his confidence cracked. He stared at the badge like it was a mirror showing him who he really was. The nearby whispers died down and the cabin became strangely silent. Brad swallowed and tried to speak, but his mouth opened without sound. He looked around as if expecting someone to laugh with him like before. Instead, people were watching him now with a new kind of attention. The woman beside him leaned away slightly and avoided his eyes. The flight worker said she needed to inform the lead crew immediately. Maya closed the holder calmly and put it back into her jacket pocket. She sat back with the same quiet control she had when she first arrived. Brad finally forced out a weak sentence and asked why she had not said it earlier. Maya looked at him with steady patience and said she should not have to prove anything. She added that respect should not depend on a badge or a title. Brad shifted again and his face turned red as if he felt trapped in his own seat. The flight worker returned with another crew member and both looked serious now. They asked Brad to explain his complaint again, but this time his voice shook. And that was when Brad realized the flight was no longer under his control. Brad sat stiff in his seat while the crew member stood beside him with a calm, serious face. His loud confidence from earlier had faded, and now his eyes moved around like he was looking for a way out. The people in nearby seats were watching him closely, and the air felt heavy with quiet judgment. Maya remained seated by the window with her hands resting on her lap and her posture relaxed. She did not look proud or angry, she simply looked steady and focused. To her this was not about winning but about keeping the peace and doing her job. The plane felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The crew member asked Brad to explain again why he wanted Maya removed. Brad cleared his throat and tried to smile, but it did not look natural. He said he just felt uncomfortable and wanted a different seat. The crew member looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He said comfort was important, but respect was more important. Brad looked down at his hands and avoided looking at Maya. The woman beside him crossed her arms and stared straight ahead. The flight worker who first came over spoke softly to the crew member. She explained what Brad had said earlier and how he pointed at Maya. The crew member listened with a serious face and then looked back at Brad. Brad tried to interrupt, but the crew member raised a hand gently. He said the airline does not allow anyone to be treated unfairly. The words were calm but firm and they filled the space around them. Maya could feel the shift in the cabin as people began to relax a little. Maya finally spoke again in a low, steady voice. She said she was only trying to travel quietly and reach her destination. She said she did not want to draw attention or cause any trouble. She simply wanted to be treated like every other passenger on that plane. Her voice carried honesty that made people listen without effort. A man across the aisle nodded slowly as if he agreed with her. Brad kept his eyes down, as if the floor had something important to say. The crew member turned to Maya and thanked her for staying calm. He said he understood her position and would make sure things were handled properly. Maya nodded and gave a small polite smile that showed no bitterness. She had learned long ago that calm can be stronger than anger. The flight worker asked Maya if she needed anything, and she said she was fine. Her calm seemed to spread through the cabin like warm light. Even the engine noise sounded softer in that moment. Brad shifted in his seat and finally looked up at Maya. His eyes were no longer sharp, but filled with something closer to worry. He tried to speak, but the words came out slow and awkward. He said he did not mean any harm and was just nervous about flying. Maya looked at him without anger and without fear. She said fear is not an excuse to hurt others. Brad nodded weakly, as if he understood more than he wanted to admit. The crew member made a decision and spoke clearly. He said Brad would be moved to another seat to avoid further tension. Brad opened his mouth, as if to argue, but then closed it again. A new seat was assigned several rows back near the middle of the plane. The woman beside Brad looked relieved as he gathered his things. People nearby watched quietly as he stood and moved down the aisle. Maya did not follow him with her eyes because she was already letting it go. As Brad walked away, he felt every stare like a weight on his back. He realized his earlier words had changed how people saw him. He had expected support, but instead he found silence and distance. When he reached his new seat, he sat down slowly and avoided eye contact. The man next to him offered no greeting and no smile. Brad stared at the seat in front of him, feeling smaller than before. The plane no longer felt like a place where he was in charge. Back in her seat, Maya looked out the window again. The lights of the airport glimmered against the dark sky. Her heart was steady and her breathing slow as she centered herself. She had faced moments like this many times in her life. Each time it reminded her why she chose her path. She did not wear her badge for pride but for protection of others. And today, it had protected more than just her. The flight crew returned to their stations as the plane prepared for takeoff. A quiet calm settled over the cabin, as if a storm had passed. People went back to their books and phones and quiet thoughts. A woman 2 rows behind leaned forward and softly thanked Maya. Maya turned and gave her a gentle smile that needed no words. Sometimes small kindness mattered more than big gestures. The engines began to hum louder as the plane moved slowly forward. As the plane rolled down the runway, Maya felt a sense of peace. Not because she had shown her badge but because she had stayed true to herself. She knew that moments like this were never easy. But they were important because they revealed who people really were. Brad had shown his fear, and Maya had shown her strength. The sky outside grew darker as the plane lifted into the air. And inside the cabin, a quiet understanding had taken root. The plane moved smoothly through the night sky and a soft hum filled the cabin. Maya sat quietly by the window watching the clouds drift past like slow white waves. Her mind was calm but alert as it always was when she traveled. She did not think about Brad anymore because she believed in leaving the past behind. What mattered now was the safety of everyone on board. She rested her hands on her lap and felt the steady rhythm of the flight. It reminded her of long missions and quiet moments between action. Several rows back, Brad sat in his new seat staring straight ahead. The world felt different to him now and not in a way he liked. He could feel the distance between himself and the people around him. No one spoke to him and no one offered friendly smiles. He realized his words had built walls around him. Every small noise in the plane made him jump. For the first time he felt like he was the one being watched. A young boy across the aisle from Maya kept glancing at her. His eyes were full of curiosity and wonder. Finally, he leaned toward his mother and whispered something. The mother smiled and nodded and then looked at Maya. She gently asked if Maya was someone who helped keep people safe. Maya smiled and said she did what she could to help. The boy looked impressed and his eyes lit up. Sometimes a simple question carried more respect than a loud demand. The mother thanked Maya for her calm earlier. She said it was brave to stay steady when things felt unfair. Maya nodded and said calm keeps the world from breaking apart. The words were simple but they carried weight. The mother squeezed her son's hand and smiled with gratitude. Maya felt a warmth that was stronger than any badge. It reminded her why she chose to serve. Brad watched this quiet exchange from a distance. He felt something twist inside him that he could not name. It was not anger but something closer to regret. He had expected Maya to look proud or cold. Instead she looked kind and grounded. That confused him more than anything else. He turned his eyes away because he did not want to face those feelings. The flight crew moved through the aisle offering drinks and small snacks. When they reached Maya she thanked them politely. When they reached Brad they stayed professional but distant. He noticed the difference and it made his chest feel tight. He realized respect is something you earn, not something you demand. Maya had earned it with silence and strength. Brad had lost it with loud words and fear. As the plane continued its journey the cabin grew quieter. Most passengers drifted into rest or quiet thought. Maya closed her eyes for a moment and listened to the engine. It sounded like a deep, steady breath. She thought about the work waiting for her when she landed. It was serious and important, but she was ready. Moments like today had only sharpened her purpose. Brad could not sleep. His mind kept replaying the scene from earlier. He saw the way people looked at him when Maya showed her badge. Not with anger but with disappointment. That hurt more than any sharp words. He realized he had judged someone without knowing anything about them. The weight of that truth pressed on him like the seatbelt across his chest. A quiet thought began to grow in his mind. What if he had been wrong? What if fear had made him blind? He looked down at his hands and saw how tightly they were clenched. Slowly he relaxed them as if letting go of something heavy. He did not know how to fix what he had done. But he knew he did not want to be that person again. Maya opened her eyes and looked down the aisle. She noticed Brad sitting still with his head lowered. She could see the shift in him, even from far away. It was subtle but real. She believed people could change if they faced themselves. She did not feel anger toward him anymore. Only a quiet hope that he would learn from this moment. The plane flew on through the dark sky carrying many stories within its walls. Some were joyful and some were heavy. But all of them were connected by this shared journey. Maya felt a deep sense of purpose as she sat there. Not just because of her job but because of who she chose to be. Calm and steady even when the world tried to shake her. And that calm was slowly touching others around her. Brad leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. For the first time since boarding the plane he took a deep breath. He did not know what would happen after the flight. But he knew something inside him had shifted. The silence around him no longer felt like judgment. It felt like space to think and grow. And that was something he had not expected at all. The plane slowly began to descend, and the lights inside the cabin grew softer. Maya opened her eyes and looked out the window as the city lights appeared below. They looked like a field of tiny stars spread across the dark ground. Her heart felt calm and steady as the journey came close to its end. She had faced many difficult moments in her life. But each one reminded her of her strength and her purpose. This flight had been another quiet test that she had passed. The captain announced the landing and people began to gather their things. Seats shifted and bags were pulled from overhead spaces. Maya stayed seated and waited patiently like she always did. She watched people move around her with tired but peaceful faces. The young boy from earlier waved at her and she smiled back. Small moments of kindness made the whole day feel lighter. Even in crowded spaces there could be connection. Brad also stood and took his bag from above his seat. His movements were slower now, and his face looked thoughtful. He glanced down the aisle toward Maya but did not speak yet. Something inside him wanted to say more than just silence. He took a step forward and then another as people began to leave. When he was closer his heart beat faster than he expected. Facing someone was harder than judging them from a distance. Maya noticed Brad walking toward her, and she turned calmly. She did not tense up or look away. She waited with quiet patience as he stopped a few steps away. Brad cleared his throat and struggled to find the right words. He said he was sorry for how he had acted earlier. The words were simple, but they were real. Maya listened without interrupting and gave him her full attention. Brad went on to say that fear had guided his words. He admitted he had been wrong and had made unfair assumptions. His voice was not loud or proud anymore. It was soft and honest in a way that showed change. Maya nodded slowly and said that recognizing a mistake was the first step. She told him that everyone has a chance to grow. Brad looked relieved, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Maya did not offer harsh words or long lectures. She only said that respect should never depend on how someone looks. Brad agreed and thanked her for listening. People nearby watched quietly, but no one interrupted. It was a moment that did not need an audience. Just two people facing the truth together. The plane felt lighter because of it. As the line of passengers moved forward, Maya and Brad walked in separate spaces. But something had shifted between them. Brad felt less trapped by his past actions. Maya felt a sense of peace knowing her calm had made a difference. The young boy waved again as he walked by. The mother smiled warmly at Maya and nodded with gratitude. These small gestures meant more than any loud praise. Once off the plane, Maya stepped into the bright terminal. The sound of rolling bags and quiet voices filled the wide space. She breathed in the air of a new city and felt ready for what came next. Her job would bring challenges, but she was prepared. Today had shown her once again that patience was powerful. She walked forward with confidence and grace, knowing she had stayed true to herself. Brad walked behind her at a distance. He did not try to speak again. He simply carried the lesson with him. He felt different now, like a door had opened in his mind. The world seemed wider and less threatening. He realized that understanding was stronger than fear. And that was a gift he would not forget. The story of this flight would stay with everyone who witnessed it. Not because of anger but because of growth. Maya had shown that quiet strength could change hearts. Brad had learned that mistakes could lead to better choices. The passengers had seen how respect could bring peace. It was not a loud ending, but it was a meaningful one. One that would echo long after the journey ended. Maya left the terminal and stepped into the fresh night air. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she moved forward. Her mission was still ahead, but her spirit was strong. She carried the lessons of the day with quiet pride. Not because she had proven anything, but because she had remained kind and steady. And that was the greatest victory of all.